And now, the truth is revealed.
The dirt on my husband's grave was not even dry when they told me to get out. I was standing in the foyer of the home we had shared for 30 years, holding a tray of leftover ham sandwiches. The funeral guests were still milling about in the living room, speaking in hushed tones about heart attacks and the fragility of life. Then the front door banged open. It was my stepson Mark. He did not wipe his muddy boots on the rug I had hand-stitched. He marched in like a soldier claiming enemy territory. Behind him stood his wife Jessica, clutching a thick manila envelope. She was not wearing black. She was wearing a bright blue dress that screamed of celebration. She looked at the walls. She looked at the antique clock. She looked at everything as if she had already sold it. Then Mark looked me in the eye and said the words that would echo in my nightmares. He said, "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Eleanor. You do not belong here anymore." Hello, everyone. I am Tina. Today I bring you a story that will challenge everything you think you know about family loyalty. Stay with me until the very end to understand why silence is sometimes the loudest weapon. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss these journeys of truth. The tray of sandwiches trembled in my hands. I set it down slowly on the hallway table next to the vase of white lilies the neighbors had sent. The heavy scent of the flowers suddenly made me feel nauseous. The chatter in the living room died instantly. The silence that followed was heavier than the grief that had been crushing me for the past 3 days. Mark stood with his chest puffed out. He looked so much like his father Robert, but his eyes were hard. They were cold stones. There was no grief in his face, only calculation. I looked at the guests. Mrs. Gable from the church choir had her hand over her mouth. The pastor was frowning deeply. They were all watching, waiting to see if the grieving widow would collapse. "Mark," I said softly. My voice sounded thin to my own ears. "Please, not today. We just buried your father." "There is no better time than today," Mark said. His voice was loud. He wanted everyone to hear. He wanted witnesses. "Dad is gone. The house was in his name. You know the law, Eleanor. Without a will stating otherwise, the property goes to the blood heir. That is me." Jessica stepped forward and slapped the envelope onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and hit the vase. Water sloshed over the rim. "We have the eviction notice drafted," Jessica said. She checked her watch. "We are being generous, giving you 24 hours. The market is hot right now, and we have a realtor coming tomorrow at noon to take listing photos. We cannot have your clutter everywhere." My clutter. She meant my life. She meant the books Robert and I had read together on rainy Sundays. She meant the quilts I had made for the grandchildren who never visited. She meant the memories that lived in every corner of this house. I felt a scream rising in my throat. I wanted to shout that I had paid for the renovations in 1998 with my own inheritance. I wanted to scream that I had nursed Robert through 3 years of cancer while Mark was too busy on business trips to visit. I wanted to tear the papers into confetti and throw them in their smug faces, but I did not. I looked at Mark. I saw the way he shifted his weight. He was ready for a fight. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to cry and beg. If I made a scene, he could tell everyone I was hysterical. He could tell everyone I was a senile old woman who needed to be managed. He wanted to justify his cruelty by making me look unstable. I took a deep breath. I clasped my hands in front of my waist. I straightened my spine. "Very well," I said. The room gasped. Mark blinked. The smirk faltered on Jessica's face for a fraction of a second. "What did you say?" Mark asked. "I said very well," I repeated. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used when I taught 3rd grade for 40 years. It was a voice that demanded attention without raising volume. "If the house is legally yours, then I will respect the law. I will pack my things." Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh. "Just your personal items, Eleanor. Do not think about taking the furniture. That is part of the estate." We checked the inventory. "Of course," I said. "I will only take what is truly mine." I turned my back on them. I did not look at the guests. I walked slowly up the stairs. I could feel their eyes burning into my back. I could hear the whispers starting again below me like a swarm of angry bees. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just a foolish old woman who had let herself be trampled by her greedy stepson. I reached the landing and paused. I looked at the oil portrait of Robert hanging in the hallway. I touched the gold frame. Mark and Jessica thought they had won. They thought the house was the most valuable thing Robert had left behind. They were focused on the brick and mortar. They were focused on the bank accounts they assumed were waiting for them. They were wrong. I walked into the master bedroom and closed the door. I locked it. Then I went to the closet and pulled down the old red shoebox from the top shelf. It was dusty. I sat on the edge of the bed where Robert had taken his last breath. I opened the box. Inside was not jewelry. Inside was not money. Inside was a stack of small leather-bound journals. Robert's journals. He had written in them every day for the last 5 years. He had written down everything, including what he really thought of his son and what he had done with his money 2 weeks before he died. I stroked the cover of the top journal. Mark wanted me out in 24 hours. I would leave, but I would not leave empty-handed, and I would certainly not leave quietly. They wanted a war. They just didn't realize they had declared it on a woman who knew where all the bodies were buried. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had memorized but never thought I would have to use. It was the number of Robert's private attorney, not the family lawyer Mark knew about, the other one. "Hello," I said when the line connected. "It is time." Mr. Henderson answered on the first ring. He did not ask how I was. He did not offer empty condolences. He simply asked if I was safe and if I had the documents. I told him yes. I told him I would be at his office at 9 in the morning on the following day. I hung up the phone and placed it gently on the nightstand. Now began the performance of my life. I had to pack my life into 2 suitcases while my heart was breaking. But I could not show a single crack in my armor. If I cried, they would enjoy it. If I yelled, they would call the police. I had to move with the precision of a surgeon. I opened my closet. I ignored the expensive coats Robert had bought me. I ignored the silk scarves. I reached for my plain wool cardigans and my sensible shoes. I folded them neatly. Inside the folds of my gray knitting sweater, I hid the first 3 journals. They were small enough to go unnoticed if someone was not looking closely. I placed the sweater at the bottom of the suitcase. I continued this pattern. A layer of clothes. A layer of truth. I packed the photo albums from before I met Robert. I packed the small ceramic cat my mother gave me in 1972. These were things of no monetary value. To Mark and Jessica, they were just junk. Trash they would have to pay someone to haul away. To me, they were my history. The door handle turned. There was no knock. Jessica walked in. She held a clipboard. She looked like a prison warden inspecting a cell. "Almost done?" she asked. Her voice was sickly sweet. It was the tone one uses with a slow child. "I am packing as fast as I can," I said without looking at her. I folded a pair of slacks. Jessica walked over to the dresser. She opened the top drawer. She rifled through my undergarments with the tip of her pen. It was humiliating. It was a violation. But I kept folding. "Just making sure you aren't taking anything that belongs to the house," she said. "Mark is very particular about the silver brushes. And the jewelry box. The jewelry box was a gift from Robert on our 10th anniversary," I said softly. "Technically, it was purchased with family funds," Jessica said. She smirked. "So it stays. Consider it rent payment for the years you lived here for free." I wanted to slap her. I wanted to tell her that I had nursed Robert through 3 years of cancer while she and Mark were on vacation in the south of France. I wanted to tell her that my pension had paid for the groceries when the business had a bad quarter in 2010. But I said nothing. I zipped up the first suitcase. "You can check it if you like," I said. I gestured to the bag. Jessica looked at the battered old suitcase. She wrinkled her nose. "I do not want to touch your old rags, Eleanor. Just get them out of here. Mark wants the locks changed by 5 o'clock. I will be gone in 10 minutes, I promised." She spun on her heels and left the room. She left the door wide open. It was a final power move, a signal that I had no privacy here, no rights. I finished packing the second bag. I hid the last journal inside my toiletry kit. It was the most important one. It was the journal from the last month of Robert's life, the one where he wrote about the visit Mark paid him when he thought I was asleep. I put on my coat. I took one last look at the room. This was where I had been happy. This was where I had been a wife. Now it was just a room in a house owned by strangers. I dragged the suitcases into the hall. They were heavy, but I refused to ask for help. I gripped the handles until my knuckles turned white. Step by step, I went down the grand staircase. The living room was empty of guests now. Only Mark and Jessica remained. They were sitting on the white sofa drinking Robert's best scotch. They looked like royalty surveying their kingdom. Mark looked up as I reached the bottom step. He did not stand up. He did not offer to help carry the bags to the door. "Taxi is waiting," Mark said. He pointed his glass toward the window. "I called it for you. Least I could do." "Thank you, Mark," I said. "Where will you go?" Jessica asked. She did not sound concerned. She sounded curious, like she was wondering where a stray dog would sleep. "I have a friend in the city," I lied. I had booked a room at a motel near the lawyer's office, but they did not need to know that. "Good," Mark said. "Don't come back begging Eleanor. We are selling the place. Developers are coming next week to look at the land, going to tear this old heap down and build condos." My heart stopped. Tear it down. Robert's masterpiece. The garden I had planted with my own hands in 1995. They were going to destroy it all for a quick payout. I looked at Mark. I memorized his face. I memorized the arrogance in his eyes. "Goodbye, Mark," I said. I opened the front door. The cold air hit my face. It felt clean. It felt like the truth. I walked down the path to the waiting taxi. The driver saw me and jumped out to take my bags. He was a stranger, but he showed me more kindness in 5 seconds than my stepson had shown me in 20 years. As the car pulled away, I did not look back at the house. I looked down at my purse. My hand rested on the leather strap. Underneath my wallet and my keys was a small audio recorder. I had turned it on before I went downstairs. I had recorded Mark saying he was selling the house to developers. I had recorded Jessica admitting they checked the inventory. But most importantly, I had the journals. And in those journals was the name of the holding company Robert had created 6 months ago, a company that technically owned the deed to the house. Mark thought he had inherited a mansion. He didn't know he had just evicted the CEO of the company that owned the roof over his head. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. The war had indeed begun, and the first battle would take place tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. The taxi driver cleared his throat as we merged onto the highway. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. He asked if I was sure about the address I had given him when he loaded the bags. He seemed concerned. Perhaps I looked too distraught to be heading into the heart of the city at this hour. I told him to drive. I told him the destination remained the same. We did not go to the motel I had booked as a decoy. That reservation was merely a failsafe in case my accounts had been frozen. But a quick check on my phone confirmed that Mark had been too arrogant to look beyond the joint checking account he shared with his father. He had drained that account dry days ago. He had not touched my personal trust. He did not even know it existed. The car slowed down in front of the Kensington. It was a tower of glass and steel that rose high above the city skyline. It was a place of power. It was a place where captains of industry made deals that changed the world. The doorman stepped forward to open the taxi door. He was a young man named David. I had hired his father 30 years ago. David froze when he saw my face. He did not see a discarded widow in a wool coat. He saw the woman who signed the paychecks for the entire building staff. "Mrs. Sterling," David said. His voice was hushed. He bowed his head slightly. "We were not expecting you until the board meeting next month." "Plans have changed, David," I said softly. "Please take my bags to the penthouse and inform the concierge that I will need a secure line established in the study immediately." I paid the taxi driver and gave him a tip that made his eyes widen. He drove away, leaving me standing on the heated pavement under the golden awning. I walked through the revolving doors. The warmth of the lobby enveloped me. It smelled of fresh lilies and polished mahogany. It was a stark contrast to the cold, drafty hallway where Mark had just evicted me. The general manager came rushing out from behind the front desk. He looked pale. He began to apologize for not having a welcome committee ready. I raised my hand to stop him. I told him I required privacy. I told him that no one was to know I was in residence, especially not my stepson. He nodded rapidly. He understood discretion. It was what I paid him for. I took the private elevator to the top floor. The ride was smooth and silent. I watched the numbers climb. With every floor, I felt the heavy cloak of the grieving widow falling away. The penthouse was exactly as I had left it 6 months ago. The cleaning staff had done their job well. The marble floors gleamed. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows like scattered diamonds. I walked to the wet bar and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady now. For 20 years I had lived in Robert's house. I had clipped coupons. I had mended my own clothes. I had driven a 10-year-old sedan. I did these things because Robert wanted to teach his son the value of money. He wanted to show Mark that wealth was not an endless spring. I had played the part of the modest second wife perfectly. I let Mark believe I was a gold digger who had failed to strike gold. I let Jessica believe I was a simple woman with simple needs. They never asked what I did before I met Robert. They never asked about the family name I had given up. They never asked who owned the controlling interest in the hotel chain they loved to stay at during their vacations. I walked into the master bedroom and opened the walk-in closet. My old business suits were hanging there. They were sharp and tailored. I ran my fingers over the fabric of a navy blazer. It felt like armor. I was not just a widow. I was Eleanor Sterling. And before I retired to marry Robert, I had been known as the Iron Lady of real estate in this city. I sat down at the heavy oak desk in the study. I placed the audio recorder next to the phone. I placed the leather-bound journal next to it. I picked up the secure landline. I dialed a number I had not called in years. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. "Arthur speaking." "Hello, Arthur," I said. "It is Eleanor. I need you to file an injunction at the courthouse as soon as they open their doors in the morning." There was a pause on the other end. Then I heard the rustle of papers. "Eleanor," Arthur said. His voice was warm. "I have been waiting for this call. Did they do it? Did they try to take the house?" "They did," I said, "and they plan to demolish it." "Then we shall demolish them," Arthur replied. I hung up the phone. I looked out at the city. The lights were bright, but my eyes were brighter. I was done being silent. Tomorrow I would speak, and they would listen. I slept for 4 hours. It was the first deep sleep I had experienced since Robert passed away. When I woke up, the sun was rising over the skyline. It painted the city in shades of gold and pink. I did not feel tired. I felt focused. Room service brought coffee and a light breakfast. I ate while reviewing the digital files on my tablet. At 8 o'clock sharp, there was a knock at the door. Arthur stood there. He looked exactly as he had 10 years ago. He was tall and broad with silver hair that was always perfectly combed. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Mark's car. He carried a thick leather briefcase that looked heavy with secrets. "Eleanor," he said. He did not hug me. He knew I needed professional distance right now. He offered a firm handshake. His grip was warm and reassuring. "Come in, Arthur," I said. "Do you have the papers?" He set the briefcase on the dining table. He clicked the latches open. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. He spread out 3 distinct piles of documents. "I pulled everything from the archives," Arthur explained. "Mark is operating under the assumption that Robert's will from 2010 is the final word. That will leaves the estate to his only son." I nodded. "I remember. Robert wrote that when we were going through a rough patch. He never updated it." "Exactly," Arthur said. A small smile played on his lips. "But Mark is forgetting basic property law. He is also forgetting who his father married." Arthur pulled a yellow document from the bottom of the stack. It was the original deed to the lakeside property. It was dated the 14th of June, 1995. "Robert bought the land," Arthur continued, "but he ran out of money during construction." "Who finished the project, Eleanor?" "I did," I replied softly. "I put $300,000 of my own money into the foundation and the framing." Robert was too proud to tell anyone. "And because of that contribution," Arthur said, pointing to a paragraph in fine print, "Robert amended the title. It is not a sole ownership. It is a joint tenancy with right of survivorship." I looked at the signatures at the bottom. Robert's sprawling script sat next to my own tight cursive. I touched the ink. It felt like touching the past. "This means," Arthur said, leaning back in the chair, "that the moment Robert's heart stopped beating, the house did not go into probate. It did not go to his son. It transferred instantly and automatically to you. The will is irrelevant regarding the real estate." I ran my hand over the paper. Mark had screamed at me. He had thrown my clothes into garbage bags. He had told me I was a guest who had overstayed my welcome. He had called the house his inheritance. He was wrong. He was trespassing on my property. There is more, Arthur said. He pulled out a second folder. This one was red. Mark sent a notice to the county clerk yesterday. He applied for a demolition permit. He wants to tear it down and sell the empty lot to a developer. He claims the structure is unsound. My blood ran cold. That house held every memory of my life with Robert, the good and the bad. The thought of a bulldozer tearing through the living room made my stomach turn. He cannot do that, I said. My voice was low. He believes he can because he thinks he is the executor, Arthur said. But look at the date on the demolition application. I looked. It was dated yesterday, the 15th of October. He signed as owner, Arthur noted. That is fraud. He does not own the title. If we present this to the judge, we do not just stop the demolition. We can have him removed from the premises by the sheriff. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the busy streets. I imagined Mark at the house right now. He was probably measuring the rooms. He was probably calculating his profit. He treated me like furniture he could toss to the curb. I do not want the sheriff to remove him yet, I said. I turned back to Arthur. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Eleanor? He threw you out in the snow. I know, I said. And if the sheriff removes him now, he will just play the victim. He will say it was a misunderstanding. He will say he didn't know about the deed. He should have done his due diligence, Arthur argued. He is arrogant, I said. Arrogance makes people sloppy. I want him to commit. I want him to stand in front of everyone and claim he owns it. I want him to start the demolition process publicly. And then I want to pull the rug out from under him when it will hurt the most. Arthur studied my face. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He slowly closed the folder. The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, Arthur said. At the house. The family lawyer is coming. Jessica invited half the town to celebrate Robert's life, which is really just a party for their inheritance. Perfect, I said. We will be there. They will try to bar you from entering, Arthur warned. Let them try, I said. I own the doors they are trying to lock. Arthur nodded. He respected the plan. He respected the fire that had returned to my spirit. I will draft the affidavit, Arthur said. I will have everything ready. But Eleanor, are you sure you can handle seeing them? They were cruel. They broke the quiet wife, I said. Now they have to deal with the business partner. I looked at the deed one last time. It was not just a piece of paper. It was my history. It was my right. And it was the weapon I would use to reclaim my dignity. One more thing, Arthur, I said. I need you to look into the bank accounts. If Mark thinks he owns the house, he probably thinks he has access to the liquid assets too. Arthur's eyes gleamed with a predatory light. I am already on it. And Eleanor? You might want to see what I found in the joint checking account ledger. He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. I picked it up. My breath caught in my throat. The transfer was dated the morning Robert died. $50,000 sent to a luxury car dealership. While I was holding Robert's hand as he took his last breath, Mark was buying a sports car with his father's money. He wasted no time, Arthur said softly. No, I replied. He did not. I folded the paper and placed it in my purse. It sat there like a heavy stone. I will see you tomorrow, Arthur, I said. The next afternoon, I did not wear the gray wool cardigan Mark despised. I went to the back of my closet at the hotel. I pulled out a black tailored suit I had not worn since the ribbon-cutting ceremony for our first office building in 1992. It was timeless. It was sharp. It was armor. I drove my rental car to the house. The driveway was packed with vehicles. There were luxury sedans and sports cars blocking the grass. I saw a large sign on the lawn that said, "Future site of luxury condos." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained stone. I parked on the street and walked up the long driveway. The front door was wide open. Music spilled out. It was not somber music. It was jazz, lively and loud. People were laughing. They held champagne flutes. This was not a memorial. It was a launch party for Mark's new life. I stepped onto the porch. Jessica was the first to see me. She wore a bright red dress that screamed for attention. She nudged Mark. Mark turned around. He held a glass of whiskey. His face flushed with anger when he saw me. He marched over to the doorway, blocking my path. I thought I made myself clear, Mark spat. The music seemed to die down as people noticed the commotion. "You are not welcome here, Eleanor. This is a private event for the owners. I am here for the reading of the will," I said. My voice was calm. It carried over the hushed crowd. "There is no reading for you," Mark laughed. He looked around at the guests, inviting them to join in his amusement. "Dad left everything to me. You are just the nurse who stuck around too long. Go back to your motel before I call security." The guests whispered. Some looked at me with pity. Others looked away. I stood my ground. I did not shrink. "You are making a scene, Mark," I said. "I am making a scene?" he shouted. "You are trespassing. Get off my property." He reached out to grab my arm. "I would not do that if I were you." The voice came from behind me. It was deep and gravelly. Mark froze. We both turned. Mr. Sterling walked up the steps. He was Robert's attorney for 40 years. He was the most feared litigator in the county. He carried a thick leather briefcase. Behind him stood two men in dark suits who looked very much like private security. Mark's demeanor changed instantly. He put on a charming smile. "Mr. Sterling," Mark said, "so glad you could make it. I was just escorting this woman off the premises so we can get down to business. I know you are a busy man. We can sign the papers in the study." Mark extended his hand to shake. Mr. Sterling did not take it. He did not even look at Mark. Instead, Mr. Sterling removed his hat. He bowed his head slightly and turned his entire body toward me. "Mrs. Vance," Mr. Sterling said. His tone was filled with a reverence that silenced the entire room. "I apologize for the delay. My associates and I are at your disposal. Shall we enter the house to begin the proceedings?" Mark's hand was left hanging in the air. He looked from Mr. Sterling to me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The guests stopped drinking. The silence was absolute. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I said. "I think the living room will be better. We have quite an audience." I stepped past Mark without looking at him. I walked into the foyer of my home. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked to the center of the room and stood in front of the fireplace. I looked at the mantel where my wedding photo used to be. It was gone. In its place was a framed architectural rendering of the condos Mark planned to build. Mark rushed in after us. He looked frantic. "Mr. Sterling, wait," Mark stammered. "Why are you talking to her? I am the executor. I am the son." Mr. Sterling set his briefcase on the coffee table. The click of the latches echoed in the room. He looked at Mark over the top of his glasses. "You are the son," Mr. Sterling agreed. "But you are not the client, and you are certainly not the executor." "What are you talking about?" Mark demanded. "My father told me." "Your father told you many things," I said. I turned to face him. "But he told the law something very different." Mr. Sterling pulled a thick document from the case. It was bound in blue paper. "This is the last will and testament of Robert Vance," Mr. Sterling announced, "dated the 3rd of August of this year." "That is impossible," Mark said. "He was sick in August. He wasn't thinking straight." "On the contrary," Mr. Sterling said. "He was very lucid. He came to my office with his primary business partner to ensure his assets were protected from external threats." Mark looked confused. "Business partner? Dad worked alone." "No," I said. "He did not." I looked at the crowd. I saw the developers Mark had invited. I saw the bankers. Robert Vance never made a single decision without consulting the vice president of Vance Enterprises, I said. "And who is that?" Jessica asked. She swirled her wine, looking bored. "Some secret partner?" "Me," I said. Jessica laughed. A sharp, cruel sound. "You? You folded his laundry, Eleanor." "I also balanced the books," I said. "I negotiated the land deals in 1989. I saved the company from bankruptcy in 2001, and I own 51% of the voting stock in the company." The glass slipped from Mark's hand. It shattered on the hardwood floor. "That is a lie," Mark whispered. "Read the first clause, Mr. Sterling," I commanded. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "I, Robert Vance, being of sound mind, do hereby revoke all former wills. I appoint my wife, Eleanor Vance, as the sole executor of my estate and the sole beneficiary of all real estate holdings, including the primary residence located at—" Mark's face went white. He looked at the guests. He looked at the demolition sign outside. "But I already signed the contract," Mark said. His voice was trembling. I took the deposit. You sold something you do not own, I said. And that is a felony. I took a step closer to him. And now, Mark, I said softly, we are going to talk about the $50,000 you stole from the joint account yesterday. The room went deadly silent. The accusation hung in the air like heavy smoke. The bankers and developers Mark had invited began to look at each other uncomfortably. They were businessmen. They knew that family drama was one thing, but embezzlement and fraud were entirely different matters. They did not want to be anywhere near a felony investigation. One by one, the men in expensive suits began to button their jackets. I think we should be going, the lead developer said. He did not look at Mark. He looked at me and gave a respectful nod. Mrs. Vance, my condolences for your loss, and my apologies for this intrusion. Wait, Mark said. He reached out to grab the man's arm. You can't leave. The deal is solid. I just need to explain. The developer pulled his arm away sharply. You took a deposit on a property you do not own, son. My legal team will be in touch about the return of our funds by tomorrow morning. If the money is not there, we will call the district attorney. Within 2 minutes, the foyer was empty. The grand party Mark had planned was over before it began. The front door clicked shut, leaving only me, Mr. Sterling, Mark, and Jessica standing in the hall. Mark slumped against the wall. He looked defeated. But Jessica did not look defeated. She looked venomous. She walked over to Mark and whispered something in his ear. Her eyes were locked on me the entire time. Mark straightened up. His expression changed from fear to a cold, desperate resolve. You think you have won, Jessica said. She stepped between me and her husband. You think because you have a piece of paper, you can throw us out on the street? You think you can humiliate Mark like that? I did not humiliate him, I said calmly. His own actions did that. We have rights, Jessica snapped. We have lived here. We have cared for this family. You lived here rent-free, I corrected her. And you cared only for yourselves. Mark stepped forward. Mom, listen to me. If you press charges about the money, or if you try to kick us out, things are going to get very ugly. We didn't want to do this, but you are leaving us no choice. There is always a choice, Mark, I said. Not when you are threatening our future, he said. We have a child to think about. We have Timothy. My heart squeezed tight in my chest. Timothy was my grandson. He was 7 years old. He was the only innocent thing in this entire mess. I had not seen him in 3 weeks because Jessica claimed he was too sick for visitors. Leave Timothy out of this, I said. My voice dropped an octave. He is a child. Jessica smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had found a weak spot in the fence. He is our child, Jessica said, and we decide who he sees. We decide who is safe to be around him. I have never been anything but loving to that boy, I said. That is not how we see it, Jessica said. She pulled a folded paper from her purse. We have noticed things lately, Eleanor. You are forgetting things. You are emotional. You talk to people who aren't there. We think you are suffering from early onset dementia. The grief has pushed you over the edge. I stared at her. I was perfectly lucid. I had just outmaneuvered a room full of sharks, but they were going to play the sanity card. That is absurd, Mr. Sterling interjected. Mrs. Vance is of sound mind. Is she? Mark asked. He avoided my eyes. Because if we go to court, Jessica and I will testify that we have seen her leave the gas stove on. We have seen her wandering the yard at night in her nightgown, looking for Dad. We will testify that she is a danger to herself and others. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. They were lying. They were inventing a narrative to destroy my credibility. And if she is not competent, Jessica added, smoothing her skirt, then the will can be contested. A judge will grant us power of attorney over her estate to protect her. And more importantly, a judge will certainly grant a restraining order to keep a confused, unstable old woman away from a 7-year-old boy. The room seemed to tilt. They were not just coming for the money anymore. They were holding my relationship with my grandson hostage. You would keep him from me? I asked softly. You would tell a lie that big just to get a condo development? We are doing what is best for the family, Mark said, reciting the line as if he had rehearsed it. We want to settle this quietly, Mom. You signed the development deal. You dropped this talk about the $50,000. You let us handle the finances. And you can see Timothy whenever you want. We will even let you live in the guest cottage once the condos are built. It is a generous offer, Jessica said. Considering you are clearly unwell. I looked at Mark, my son, the boy I had raised. He was willing to label me insane in a court of law. He was willing to use his own son as a bargaining chip to cover his theft. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, his face red with anger. This is extortion. I will have you both disbarred from every polite society in this state. I raised my hand to stop him. No, Mr. Sterling, I said. My voice was very quiet. Let them finish. I want to be sure I understand the terms. The terms are simple, Jessica said. You cooperate, or we file for an emergency competency hearing tomorrow morning. We will tell the judge you are losing your mind, and you will never see Timothy again without supervision. I looked at the architectural rendering of the condos sitting on the mantel. I looked at the spot where my wedding photo should have been, and then I looked at my son. They thought they had me cornered. They thought that by threatening my heart, they could control my hand. They did not understand that they had just severed the last thread of mercy I had left for them. So, I said, clasping my hands in front of me, you are worried about the safety of a child. Yes, Mark said. That is our priority. Good, I said, because so am I. I turned to Mr. Sterling. Open the second file, I said. Mr. Sterling paused. He looked at me, then at the blue folder in his bag. He knew what was in there. He knew it was the nuclear option. Are you sure, Eleanor? He asked. Once we do this, there is no going back. They threatened my grandson, I said coldly. Open it. Mr. Sterling placed the blue folder on the coffee table. The sound of it hitting the wood echoed in the silent room. It was not a thick file. It did not need to be. The truth is often very compact. Jessica laughed nervously. She tried to maintain her air of superiority, adjusting the collar of her silk blouse. She asked what this was. She asked if it was my medical records. She was still trying to play the game she thought we were playing. It is not my medical history, I said. I walked over and opened the folder myself. It is yours. I picked up the first document. It was a bank statement, but not from my account. You see, I began, my voice steady, when I noticed the $50,000 missing from my savings, I did not just call the bank. I called a forensic accountant, a very expensive one. I wanted to know where the money went, but he found something much more interesting than where it went. He found out why you needed it so badly. Mark went pale. The blood drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. He knew. He knew exactly what was on those pages. It was not just for a lifestyle upgrade. Was it, Mark? I asked. I looked him in the eye. It was a frantic attempt to plug a hole in the escrow account of your real estate firm. Jessica stood up. She shouted that this was illegal. She said I had no right to look at their business records. These are public records, Mr. Sterling interrupted. Or at least, the liens against your company are public. The investigation into the misappropriation of client funds, however, is something the state licensing board takes very seriously. We did some digging into the court filings from the 23rd of August. I laid the papers out on the table like a game of solitaire. You have been taking deposits for condos in the Riverview project, I said. Deposits that are supposed to sit in a protected trust until construction begins. But construction has not begun, and the trust is empty. I pointed to the line items. $200,000 withdrawn on the 4th of May. Another $150,000 on the 10th of June. You spent it. You spent other people's money to pay off the loans you took out to start the company. That is fraud, Mark. That is grand larceny. The room was deadly silent. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly. You needed my land, I continued, not because it is a good investment, but because you need to use the loan from this property to pay back the money you stole from the Riverview clients before the auditors arrive next month. You are robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I am Peter. Jessica slumped back onto the sofa. Her arrogance was gone. It was replaced by the terrified look of a woman watching her life crumble. If we report this, Mr. Sterling said, you will both go to prison for a very long time, and the state will take custody of Timothy immediately, considering his parents are felons. I watched them, I watched the realization sink in. They had come here to threaten me with a competency hearing. They had come to tell the world I was a confused old woman. But I was the only one in the room who knew exactly what was happening. You called me unstable, I said. You said I was a danger to myself. But you are the ones gambling with your freedom. You are the ones who have committed crimes. Mark looked at his hands. He was shaking. Mom, he whispered. Please, it got out of hand. We just need time. You do not have time, I said. And you do not have my land. I picked up the rendering of the condos from the mantel, the pretty picture of the buildings that would never be built. I tore it in half. The sound of the ripping paper was satisfying. Here is what is going to happen, I said. You are going to sit there and listen. And for the first time in years, you are going to show me some respect, because I hold your future in my hands. I turned to Mr. Sterling. Show them the second document, I said. The one regarding the safety inspections. Mark looked up, his eyes wide with panic. He thought I was done. He thought the financial fraud was the only weapon I had. He was wrong. You did not just steal money, I said. You cut corners on the electrical work at the Miller project. We have the emails between you and the contractor. You told him to ignore the code violations to save money. Mom, stop, Mark begged. Tears were running down his face now. You put families at risk, I said. You put children at risk, just like you threatened to keep me from my grandson. You do not care about anyone but yourselves. I leaned forward. So do not speak to me about competency, Mark. Do not speak to me about what is best for the family. You have forfeited the right to speak at all. Mark wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked like a child again. A child who had broken a window and was waiting for the punishment. But this was not a broken window. This was a broken life. Jessica found her voice first. It was shaky. She tried to smooth her skirt. She tried to regain some composure. Okay, she said. Okay, you made your point. We messed up. We were desperate. But sending us to jail does not help anyone. It definitely does not help Timothy. If we go away, he goes into the system. Is that what you want? You claim to love him. She was using my grandson as a shield again. It made my blood run cold, but I expected it. Timothy will not go into the system, I said calmly. Mr. Sterling has already drafted a petition for temporary guardianship. Given the evidence of your criminal negligence and financial instability, the courts will grant it to me without hesitation. I have a clean record. I have the means, and I have the home. You can't raise a child, Mark spat out. You are too old. I am old enough to know right from wrong, I replied, which is something you evidently never learned. I sat back in my chair. It was time for the final blow, the one they would never see coming. But we are not done yet, I said. Mr. Sterling, the blue folder, please. Mr. Sterling placed a thick blue folder on the coffee table. It looked heavy. What is this? Mark asked. He sounded exhausted. You have been living beyond your means for a long time, I said. The new cars, the vacations to Europe, the private club memberships. You wanted to look rich. You wanted everyone to envy you. But you were drowning in debt. And not just the business debt. I opened the folder. Your personal mortgage, I said. You have not made a payment in 4 months. The bank was preparing to foreclose. They were going to take this house. The very house you told me I was not welcome in. Jessica gasped. How do you know that? That is private. Nothing is private when you stop paying your bills, I said. Banks get nervous. They look for a way to recover their losses. They look for someone to buy the debt. I paused. I wanted them to understand exactly how the trap had closed. I contacted the bank 3 weeks ago, I said. I spoke to their distressed assets division. I offered to buy the note on your mortgage. I offered to buy the outstanding loans on your cars, and I offered to buy the personal guarantee you signed for the business. Mark went pale. You bought our debt? I did, I said. I used the money from my husband's life insurance. The money you always told me I should invest more aggressively. Well, I finally took your advice. I invested in something I have intimate knowledge of. I invested in you. I tapped the blue folder. I own this house, Mark. I own your cars. I own the clothes in your closet. Technically, you are currently trespassing on my property. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of total defeat. You are my landlord? Jessica whispered. She looked like she might be sick. I am your creditor, I corrected her. I am the bank, and I am calling in the loan. I stood up. My knees did not ache. My back was straight. I felt stronger than I had in 20 years. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, I said. You will leave everything behind. The furniture, the electronics, everything that was purchased with stolen money or credit you could not afford stays here. You leave with your clothes and your personal essentials. Nothing else. Mom, you cannot be serious, Mark said. Where will we go? I do not know, I said. Maybe you can stay with friends. Although considering how you treat people, I doubt you have many left. This is cruel, Jessica cried. You are enjoying this. I am not enjoying this, I said. This is a tragedy, but it is a tragedy of your own making. I am simply the one cleaning up the mess. I am securing the assets so that when the authorities come, there is something left to pay back the people you stole from. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. My garden. You wanted me gone, I said without turning around. You wanted to erase me. You wanted my money and my land, and then you wanted to put me in a home where I would be forgotten. You underestimated me because I am quiet. You thought silence was weakness. You were wrong. I turned back to face them. Now get out of my sight. Go pack your bags. Mr. Sterling will stay here to ensure you do not take anything that does not belong to you. Mark looked at Jessica. She was sobbing into her hands. He looked at me. There was no defiance left in his eyes, only shame. What about Timothy? He asked quietly. Timothy stays with me, I said. He has a school recital on Friday. I will be taking him, and for the first time in his life, he will have someone in the audience who is actually listening to him play, rather than checking their phone or worrying about the police. I motioned to the door. Go, I said. Start packing. The clock is ticking. They did not go quietly. I expected anger, but I did not expect them to try to use the law against me one last time. Mark and Jessica were desperate. They convinced themselves that I was not capable of such a strategic maneuver on my own. They told themselves, and then they told a judge, that I must be mentally incompetent. 3 days after I ordered them out of my house, we stood in a courtroom. It was the 12th of November. The air outside was crisp and cold, but inside the hearing room, it was stifling. Mark had filed an emergency motion for a conservatorship. His lawyer, a man with a shiny suit and a loud voice, argued that I was being manipulated. He claimed that I was suffering from dementia and that I was vindictively destroying my son's livelihood due to confusion and paranoia. They wanted to silence me. They wanted a judge to declare me unfit so they could annul the debt purchase and take control of my finances again. It was a public hearing. People were watching. Mark looked at me with a sorrowful expression that he had practiced in the mirror. He played the part of the concerned son perfectly. My mother is not herself, Mark told the judge. She does not understand what she is doing. She is throwing her own family onto the street. We just want to protect her. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked at me. Mrs. Harrison, she said, do you understand why you are here? I stood up. I smoothed the fabric of my skirt. I did not look at Mark. I looked directly at the judge. I am here because my son is embarrassed, I said. My voice was steady. It carried to the back of the room. He is embarrassed that his mother, whom he ignored for 10 years, has proven to be a better businesswoman than he is. I motioned to Mr. Sterling, who handed a thick stack of documents to the bailiff. These are the forensic accounting records of my son's business, I told the court. They show that Mark and Jessica have been using company funds to pay for luxury vacations, leased vehicles, and designer clothing since 2019. They are insolvent. I did not buy their debt to ruin them. I bought it to ensure that when they inevitably declared bankruptcy, the house my husband built would not be sold to strangers at an auction. The judge began to flip through the pages. The silence in the room grew heavy. The rustling of paper was the only sound. I am not confused, Your Honor, I continued. I am simply the only person in this family who pays their bills. I own the mortgage, I own the loans, and I am exercising my legal right to foreclose on tenants who have not paid rent in 6 months. The judge stopped turning the pages. She looked over her glasses at Mark. His face had turned a deep, blotchy red. Jessica was staring at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "Mr. Harrison," the judge said. Her voice was ice. "These documents allege serious financial fraud. You brought this motion to question your mother's competency, but the only incompetence I see here is your own management of your affairs." The gavel came down. The motion was dismissed with prejudice, but it was worse than a dismissal. By bringing this to court, Mark had made the evidence part of the public record. There were creditors in the back of the room. I saw them taking notes. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. Mark tried to approach me, perhaps to beg, perhaps to yell. Mr. Sterling stepped in front of him. "The keys," Mr. Sterling said, "to the sedan. Mrs. Harrison is repossessing it effective immediately. You can take the bus." I watched my son hand over the keys. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He was no longer the giant who had overshadowed me. He was just a man who had made too many mistakes. "Goodbye, Mark," I said. I got into my car. We drove to the elementary school. That Friday, I sat in the second row of the auditorium. The seats were hard, but I was comfortable. The lights dimmed. Timothy walked onto the stage. He looked nervous. He scanned the audience. When his eyes found mine, he stopped. I smiled and nodded. He took a deep breath and sat at the piano. He began to play. It was a simple song, but he played it with heart. I closed my eyes and listened. For the first time in years, my mind was quiet. There was no shouting. There were no demands. There was only the music and the knowledge that I had protected what mattered. I was not just an observer anymore. I was the guardian of this piece. And as the final note rang out, I clapped the loudest of all.